So welcome back to the second part of this recording. I finished before break by saying that this replacement of Christ's image on the Justinian II coin from the late 7th century, his successor Leontius had Christ's image replaced by a Christian cross. This can be seen as a prelude to the so-called iconoclasm in East Rome, the Byzantine iconoclasm, when images were forbidden altogether in religious settings. And this happened in two phases. The first one from 726 to 787, and then the second one from 813 to 843. There is a special text in the course readings for this week, a chapter by Judith Herrin on iconoclasm and icon veneration, where she goes through the historical procedure in some detail. The 7th century, the 700s, I should say, the 8th century, was a critical period for the Byzantine Empire. It was under attack from external enemies, above all the Arabs, the Umayyad Caliphate. Its forces invaded Byzantine territory from the east and besieged Constantinople in 717 to 718. Now the East Romans defended their city successfully, but following this, the Byzantine army suffered a series of defeats against the Muslims, and there were also the Bulgars that invaded from the north into the Balkans. These two maps, they show the diminution of the East Roman territory, the Byzantine Empire. In 565, it had its the largest. It extended all around the Mediterranean. That was the reign of Justinian I back in the 6th century. And then, well, 140 years later, it had shrunk drastically. 150 years later. That is what the large map shows. The Byzantine or East Roman territory were just isolated spots in Italy and parts of Greece, and then what is today Turkey, Constantinople in the center. The striped areas are areas that were threatened by the Arab invaders. So there was a general sense of disaster, threatening disaster. This was further heightened in 726 when an underwater volcanic eruption in the Aegean Sea in the Mediterranean, East Mediterranean, spewed lava and stones into the air, and this darkened the sky for days, obviously very frightening experience. So these misfortunes gave rise among the East Romans to the idea that it was God's way of punishing the Byzantines for the religious veneration of icons. Muslims do not allow images in their mosques, so when God granted victory to the Muslims against the East Roman army, this could mean that the veneration of images was something that displeased God, since it went against the second commandment that I have brought up repeatedly already. The second commandment, you shall not make for yourselves any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the water under earth. You shall not bow down thyself to such images. You shan't serve them. Now this for the iconoclasts, and that's a term that is constructed from the Greek words icon, which means image or likeness, and clast, to break. So image breakers. An iconoclast is an image breaker. And for the iconoclast to venerate images, icons, that was a very central feature of the East Roman Christian liturgy, veneration of images of Christ and Mary and the saints. This was blasphemic idolatry to the iconoclasts. And their argument was that Christ's nature consists of divine and human in union, and the divine cannot be depicted, should not be depicted. So it is blasphemic to make images of Christ and other holy persons, and to venerate these images is to worship idols. So as a result, in 726, all images were forbidden in ecclesiastical settings, in religious contexts, not outside church sanctuaries, but in a church setting, in a religious setting, images, figurative images, were not acceptable. And this is a Psalter, an illuminated manuscript that is made after the iconoclasm in the 9th century. So this is an illumination that is critical towards the iconoclasts. It shows the high priest, the patriarch of Constantinople, is the man in the orange tunic in the lower left, and he's whitewashing a painted icon of Christ. He's painting over it or whitewashing it. He's obliterating it. And in this miniature, in this Kludov Psalter, as it is called, as a book with a book of, or a manuscript with a book of Psalms in the Old Testament. And this image likens this action, the patriarch's whitewashing destruction of an image of Christ, is compared to the actual crucifixion and the piercing of Christ's side, the torturing of Christ at the crucifixion. And iconoclasm caused widespread destruction of ecclesiastical images, religious images throughout the empire. It ceased temporarily in 787. There was a decision at the Church Council to allow cult images. You have the details in this article or the chapter by Judith Herring concerning that, the circumstances. But then iconoclasm broke out again in a second phase in 813, and it ended definitively only in 843. And the icon lovers, the iconodules as they are called, they used the same argument as the iconoclasts, but came to the opposite conclusion. Since Christ's nature consists of divine and human in union, and since God has taken visible form in Christ, that is the incarnation that is mentioned a couple of times in the textbook. Incarnation is the embodiment of God the Son in human flesh as Jesus Christ. And since God has taken visible form in Christ, it is legitimate to depict him in art and in his human form. In the icon that you see, the painting that you see to the left, I showed it already in last week's class. It's the earliest known representation of Christ as dead on the cross. And it is belongs to the St. Catherine Monastery in Sinai in Egypt. So the icon was painted in the period of the iconoclasm, but Egypt and Sinai at that time was no longer part of the Byzantine Empire, so the monks weren't affected by the prohibition to make images. They didn't care about that. The monastery was a kind of an isolated Christian island in a sea, in an Islamic sea. It still is. The St. Catherine Monastery is located in the middle of Sinai, which is part of Muslim Egypt. And the icon then makes the argument that Christ actually did die. It shows him dead on the cross with a crown of thorns and the blood streaming from the wound in his side. He did die and he rose again from the dead. This was contrary to what the Muslims, the surrounding area, claimed, that Christ was merely a prophet. He was not the Son of God. So the icon is a kind of a visual argument, rhetoric argument in visual terms of that underlines, highlights Christ's actual death and then resurrection. And ever since 843, when the iconoclasm ended and the decision was made finally that icons were legitimate and even desirable and even necessary in churches. Ever since 843, icons are crucial in Eastern Orthodox churches. They are seen as carriers of the holiness of the saintly person they depict. So these are two interiors of churches today, Orthodox churches today, one in Georgia, in Tbilisi, in European Georgia, and one actually taken from the Church of the Dormition of the Virgin in Beijing, in China. And I choose these two slides just to demonstrate the abundance of holy images that fill every available surface in an Orthodox church. So the icons are kind of part, or they take part of the holiness of the person that is depicted. It's not the icon, the painted image, the physical matter that is venerated, but the holy person that that icon represents. And the icon takes part of the holiness of that person. That is the Orthodox stance towards images. In the Western Church, images do not have this status. Images are okay, but they are not necessary in any way. You can have a church completely devoid of images. It works as well. Like if it's totally, undecorated with figurative imagery. And in the Western Church, the Western Roman Catholic Church, images, icons are not seen as channels of communication with the divine in the same way that that icons are what the icons stand for in the Eastern Orthodox Church. In the Western Roman Church, the Catholic Church, this function was instead ascribed to relics. Relics are pieces of matter, bone, for instance, that have been part literally of the physical body of a saint, or perhaps a piece of garment, piece of costume that the saint has been wearing, or the instrument of torture or instrument of death used when the saint became a martyr. And all these pieces that are physically connected, that have been handled or somehow dealt with by a saint, they are relics, and they were seen and are seen by devout Catholics as still as sharing some of the sacrality of the saintly person that they have belonged to or are part of. So bones are literally seen as parts of the saints from whom they derived, and parts indeed of the still living saint, because the saint, after his death, is taken up to heaven. His soul is, or her soul is taken up to heaven. His body remains, or her body remains on earth until the end of days, when he or she is resurrected. But the saint lives in heaven, and the relic is kind of a channel of communication, a door that opens towards the saint, and through which you can communicate with the saint. So to pray before a relic is to actually pray before the living saint. And this is a late medieval, just to exemplify what a bone relic looks like. This is beyond the scope of this course. It's late medieval, so it's kind of part of what we are talking about. It's an arm reliquary, a wooden reliquary in the shape of an arm from perhaps the 15th century, with a bone. It contains a bone which is not an arm bone, but a thigh bone, a leg bone, in fact, with a label that tells us that it's a bone from one of the martyrs of the Theban Legion. It's an early Roman, early Christian legion of soldiers who mass converted, and were put to death because of that, the Theban Legion. And it is today in the National Museum of Denmark. Now, relics are very precious. They are saintly, sacred matter, and as such, extremely precious and holy. And this is, in fact, this image displays a relic in a way that it shouldn't be displayed, because we can actually see the relic, the bones, with our own eyes. Normally, relics are, at least in the Middle Ages, they were seen as too sacred to be shown, to be displayed like this. They were normally shielded or contained in caskets or containers of various kinds. This is a relic casket, an early relic casket from from the late 8th century. Belongs to the collection of the Enger monastery in Germany. So it's called the Enger reliquary. It consists of a wooden core, hollow wooden core. There is a compartment for the actual relic, and then this wooden core is covered by gilded silver that is decorated with gems and cloisonné enamels, and there are tabs on both sides, so it can be put on a chain or on a strap and carried around. And when put inside this relic casket, the relic is obviously out of sight. It's too sacred even to be beheld by mortal eyes. So it's there, but it's shielded and hidden. The casket, of course, is valuable because it's made from precious material, but it's even more valuable because of the holy matter inside. That's the real treasure. And the treasure of the relic, simple matter as it is, but it's sacred matter. So it exceeds by far the casket in its immaterial value. In this case, we don't know exactly from what saint the relic inside derived, because there is no, the relic is gone, it's lost. If it was labeled, the label is missing as well. So we can't be sure what saint that this relic casket actually held relics from. But it's a good, I'm very fascinated by relics and reliquaries because of this combination of precious materials, gold and silver and gems and enamels on the one hand, and then what they contain, the reliquaries contain something that looks very humble and simple and base material to the eye, piece of bone or perhaps a pebble or a splinter of wood, but the actual value lies in the sacrality, the sacredness of the relic. It's charged, humble as it is, with holiness, and the reliquary is just a mere container. The precious materials of the reliquary is demonstration of the true value, or underlines the true value of the relic, but the gold and silver and gems is nothing compared to the preciousness of the actual relic. Also, the saints in heaven, they reside in the heavenly Jerusalem. It's described in the book of Revelations, the last book of the Bible, the heavenly Jerusalem or heavenly paradise. That's where those Christians that are condemned to eternal salvation, they will end up in the heavenly Jerusalem, and that is where the saints who have died but whose souls are taken up to heaven, that's where they are waiting for the end of days. And heavenly Jerusalem in the book of Revelations is described as a city of gold, and the streets are made from pearls, and the 12 gates of the heavenly Jerusalem are set with all kinds of precious stones. So in a way, the precious materials of the reliquaries can be seen as images of this golden bejeweled city, the heavenly Jerusalem. So reliquaries hold remains of saints whose living souls are in the heavenly Jerusalem, and the precious gilded surfaces and gems and enameled decoration of the reliquaries, they correspond, or they represent this splendid heavenly city made from gold and precious stones. Lots of symbolism that can be read into these objects. Now I will go back in time for a moment. I will talk about a kind of object that I mentioned in passing only so far, namely the book. And a couple of weeks ago, I showed you this, we looked at this mosaic, and I pointed out the contrast between, on the one hand, Christ's scroll that he's holding with a prophecy from the Old Testament. It's an ancient medium for writing. And then the books held by the evangelist symbols. That was something that was quite new at the time, the codex, or the bound book. In antiquity, there were no books in codex form. The name codex is later, it's from the 16th century, and it means it's a bound book, like the kind of books that we use today. Codex means wood, or a block of wood. That might refer to the wooden covers that were used to protect the pages inside. In antiquity, the codex didn't exist. People wrote on scrolls, on long, narrow writing sheets. In ancient Egypt, the scrolls were made from papyrus. The Romans introduced parchment made from animal skins, which is more durable than papyrus. It doesn't crack when it's rolled up. But a scroll is, nevertheless, all the same, a scroll is not a very well-suited base for painted images, because paint will flake and crack when the scroll is rolled up. So it's only when the codex, the bound book with leaves, begin to replace the scroll from the first century of the Common Era that book painting, illumination as an art form starts to come into its own. We speak of manuscripts when a book is not printed. That came in the 15th century. It was known for centuries in China, of course, but in Western civilization, the technique, the technology to print books was invented in the 15th century. Before that, books were written by hand. So we call them manuscripts, and that's a word constructed from two Latin words, manu, hand, or by hand, and scriptus, written. So a manuscript is a handwritten text, handwritten book. And when a manuscript is decorated with images, it is illuminated. So illumination is a visual element that illuminates, lightens up the page, and perhaps enlightens also the viewer. As an art form, book painting or illumination, as I said, started to come into its own, where the codex was gradually replaced the scroll as a writing medium, because pages, the leaves of codex, are well suited for illumination, whereas a scroll that is rolled and unrolled, it isn't very, very useful in that context. And what you see now is one of the oldest illuminated manuscripts that has survived. It's an East Roman work. It's not known exactly where in the Eastern Mediterranean, Eastern Roman, Byzantine territory it was made. And it is called today the Rossano Gospels, from the collection where it belongs today. And it is dated to the 6th century. So it's a very early, or it's the earliest, one of the earliest illuminated manuscripts that we know of. And it's a super deluxe object. It's written with silver ink. It has gone dark, but the ink is originally silver on purple parchment that is colored purple. And this color, purple color, was associated with the emperor, with the Byzantine emperor. So the owner of this Rossano Gospel book, containing the Gospels, the New Testament, he must or she must have been someone of very high status, a member perhaps of the imperial family. And this is a page to the left that shows two scenes from the sequence of events that led to Christ's crucifixion. On the upper part is Christ being tried before the Roman prefect, the Roman official, Pontius Pilate. It's the bald-bearded man in the center. He was reluctant but persuaded by the Jews to condemn Christ to death. So he finally did that. It is Christ standing to the far left. And then below is the disciple Judas, one of the 12 disciples who betrayed Jesus, told the Roman soldiers where they could find him so they could capture him. And for that, he was paid 30 silver coins. But then he started to feel bad about the whole thing. So he tried to give these coins back, which is what you see on the lower part of this illuminated page. And finally, he hanged himself. He committed suicide. And to the right is another page from the same Rossano Gospel manuscript. It's something that we will see more of. It's a portrait, you could say, portrait of the author of the text, which is the evangelist Mark, Saint Mark. He's shown busy writing his text, the Gospels that are the content of the manuscript. And there is a female personification of wisdom who is kind of instructing him what to write on the page. Here is another illuminated manuscript. It's contemporary with the Rossano Gospels, and I should perhaps mention that these manuscripts are excuse me, dealt with in the chapter of the textbook that is part of last week's reading, but to me it made more sense. I felt that the structure of my lecture was better if I included them in this week's lecture. I hope that you don't mind that I switch things around a little bit now and then. So this is another illuminated manuscript, contemporary, roughly, with the Rossano Gospels, made in Italy. somewhere in Rome, perhaps. But it ended up at the other end of the European continent. It ended up in Canterbury in England. It's called the St. Augustine Gospels, named after the probable owner, Augustine. He was a missionary, an Italian monk and missionary, and he traveled to England in the 6th century to convert the Anglo-Saxons. They had remained pagan. It took them long to accept this new religion, Christianity. And Augustine was fairly successful. He became the first archbishop, the first head of the Catholic Church in England, the first archbishop of Canterbury, and that's where this manuscript is today. And he died in 604, and was soon venerated as a saint. He's seen as the apostle of the English. This painting, though, does not show St. Augustine. It's another author's portrait. This is the opening page of the Gospel of Luke. So it is the writer or the author of the Gospel, Luke, who is depicted holding, he's not writing his Gospels in this case, he's holding the book in his lap. And we know, it says Luke on the inscription above him, but we also recognize the ox. That is the evangelist symbol of Luke above him. And there are small scenes from the life of Christ that surround this central figure. Now, Christianity is a book religion. So to celebrate Mass, books are necessary. So every missionary, like Augustine, who traveled to for instance, England, to spread the gospel, had to carry his own library with him. So this was one of the books that St. Augustine, it's quite likely that it was actually, this book was actually part of the library of Augustine when he came to the British Isles in the late 6th century. So missionaries had to bring books with them, and then once Christianity was established in a new territory, more books had to be produced locally for the new churches that were built across this newly Christianized territory. And the British Isles became a hotspot for the making of books. Monasteries were founded, and monasteries became cornerstones for the consolidation and cultivation of Christian worship and learning. This is one of these monasteries. It's on the island Skellig Michael outside the Irish coast. It's a very rugged, very isolated place. Nonetheless, there were no less than 3 churches, and later 4 churches, built on the site, on the pre-kinks of this monastery, and there was in all 6 cells for the monks to live in. So this is a plan that the orange structures B, C, D, E, F, and G are the cells for the monks. The green structures are a church and 2 chapels, and the larger A structure must have had some kind of communal function, perhaps a refectory, a dining hall, and then there was an hermitage for an hermit who wanted to live even more isolated than the other monks. On the tip of the island, and the yellow crescent shape is the latrines, also a necessary feature of a place like this. So Skellig Michael is a bit beside the point, I must admit, that I'm making here about monastic book production, because as far as I know, there are no illuminated manuscripts that are known to have been made at Skellig Michael. But the site is included in the book, so I wanted to mention it nevertheless, and it's quite spectacular and gives you an idea of the circumstances, the hardships that the monks put themselves through as a part of their pious veneration of the divine. This is a medieval scribe at work. This image is also out of context because it's from a French 14th century manuscript, but I choose to include it anyway because it illustrates that monks who wrote and illuminated books needed models to work from. See that the monk here is writing a book on a page, and he has his models before him, the text that he's copying. Because book production in the Middle Ages is not about creating original new texts, but about copying the canonized books of the Bible and the various texts that were needed for Mass. So when missionaries like Augustine brought books with them from abroad, it was a means to supply the scribes and also the painters in the workshops in the British monasteries with models that they could work from when they produced the necessary texts that were needed for the liturgy. And also the painters worked from models in order to make the illuminations, the visual decoration that was proper and legitimate in the sacred texts. And this is a unique instance of no less than two miniatures, two copies made in British monasteries from the same original. And that original does not exist any longer. It was probably an Italian manuscript. It has been lost, but these two images, miniatures that we have here are quite obviously made from this same now missing original. They both show the authors of books in the Bible. To the left is the Old Testament prophet Ezra, who is writing his book, part of the Old Testament, and that codex, the Jarrow Codex, is made or was made in the monk Weymouth Jarrow Monastery at the middle of the 8th century. And not far from the monk Weymouth Jarrow Monastery is the Lindisfarne Monastery, where the Lindisfarne Gospels were made, also in the 8th century. And the miniature in this case to the right shows Saint Matthew, the evangelist Matthew, busy writing his book. So they are very similar in composition. They have been copied from the same model or original, but stylistically, they speak different languages. The painter of the Jarrow Codex, Saint Ezra Prophet, he is fairly faithful probably to the original because there is an effort towards three-dimensionality. The painter has used light and shadow and perspective to create spatial depth and volume, and the figure, the prophet, looks more naturalistic if you compare to the Lindisfarne Gospels, where there is no spatial depth to speak of. The figures, St. Matthew and his symbol, the winged man or the angel, and also the figure that is peeping out behind the drapery. It's a bit, it's a mystical figure. It's not quite clear who that is supposed to be, the face to the right. But they are flat, as if they are cutouts, and the pictorial elements are outlined with thick black contours. There is no play with light and shadow as in the Jarrow Codex. This painter of the Lindisfarne Gospels, Edfrith was probably his name, he was trained in a manner that is rooted in the visual language of the migration period. The ornaments that protrude from the corners of the frame, they could be taken directly from the Sutton Hoopers, for instance. And when we turn the page over, this is what we see. This is a so-called carpet page, where every millimeter of the surface is covered by a complicated pattern of extremely stylized snakes and birds, dog-headed serpents and long-beaked birds that are intertwined in loops and spirals. It's very intricate, very precise, and well-worked. It's just amazing the amount of planning and effort that must have gone into the creation of this carpet page in the Lindisfarne Gospels. And on the page opposite this carpet page, the Gospel text begins, the Gospel of Matthew. The first words are Liber generationis Jesu Christi fili David fili Abraham. So in English, this is a genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. That's the beginning of the Matthew Gospels. But on this first text page, the text and the ornamentation fuse into a decorative whole. So the pages and the letters are as much visual patterns as they are texts or text to read. The frame and the first three letters, LIB, they are filled with the same kind of stylized animal ornamentation as in the carpet page. And the pages such as these, they are not really meant to be read in the normal sense. They are intended for visual meditation. The monks knew the text anyway, so the monks didn't need to be able to read clearly what is written on the page. They knew it by heart. Large part of their day was spent reading and meditating over the Holy Scripture. So books like this were meant to meditate over. You could like sink into the page visually, follow the complicated pattern with your gaze and immerse in the deeper meaning of what is written there. It's kind of a visual meditation as much as a text to be read and understood. Part of the course readings this week is an article by Alison Rosenblit on anomalies in the Lindisfarne Gospels and the aesthetics of Anglo-Saxon art. So Alison Rosenblit, she studies details that are left unfinished or rendered in a matter that differs from elsewhere on the same page. That's what has caught her interest, and she tries to explain these, what she calls anomalies or discrepancies in particularly two English or Anglo-Saxon manuscripts. And the first one is the Lindisfarne Gospels again. So examples of these tiny discrepancies and anomalies, you have to look real close to see them. There is the so-called Jerome page. The Jerome carpet page is the image to the left. And there is the John page that I show you to the right. And here is the slide that shows the anomalies on the Jerome page. There is a circular plate that should have been colored red, same as the other ornaments in the uppermost section of this carpet surface. If I go back to the previous image, there are 4 such circular, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 actually circular patterns or ornaments in the uppermost row on the carpet page beneath the frame. And every second is red and every second is yellow, but then this one is left uncolored, or at least it's not colored red as it should be, according to otherwise the structure of this, the pattern. And then on the St. John carpet page, there are birds in many places everywhere. And the birds have wings that are striped pink and light blue, and then the feathers, contours of feathers are painted onto the striped wings, except for in one case where the feathers are omitted. It's just colored stripes that stand out. Back to the Matthew page, there is one bird again in the lower right corner that has a spiral joint, where other birds have colored unspiraled joints. And another illuminated manuscript from around 700 that also belongs to the Anglo-Irish group of manuscripts is the so-called Book of Durrows. And here is yet carpet page, full page miniature with abstract ornamentation. And I have tried to demonstrate how there are 4 similar ornaments, one in each corner, and the square fillings of these ornaments are alternatively green and yellow. And the ornament in the lower, the lower left corner has been turned like, what is it, 90 degrees, so that the yellow fillings are, horizontally on the horizontal axis, whereas the green fillings are on the, no, the yellow fillings are on the vertical axis and the green fillings are on the horizontal axis, while it is the opposite. It goes for the other ornaments. This is easier to see than to describe, actually. The Rosenblit has several more examples of this. I won't go into all of them. This is, I think, the last one I have is the image of Matthew, also from the Book of Durrow, with alternatively red and yellow checks, squares on the shoulders, and according to the systematics of the decoration, the left square should be, well, the colors have been changed. It's not entirely symmetrical on the shoulders of the figure. So how should these anomalies be explained? They're obviously deliberate. They are intentional. They are not mistakes or misunderstandings. This is how the painters deliberately planned the decoration to look like. So there are various explanations that have been suggested previously. One is similar to the Islamic idea of perfection as God's privilege. God has created the world perfectly, and the artist then was required to practice the humility of avoiding absolute perfection in order not to commit the sacrilegious act of imitating God's perfection. So one inspiration for that explanation comes from Oriental prayer carpets or prayer rugs, where similar discrepancies or anomalies are sometimes explained as the deliberate avoidance of the carpet maker from creating something that is entirely perfect. But this idea of deliberate imperfection on Oriental prayer rugs has been questioned, and it might be something that carpet dealers in the 19th century invented to explain away for their customers any flaws and deficiencies in their goods. So Rosenblit calls this explanation a red herring. It's misleading. It's a blind track. It points in the wrong direction. And another possibility is that the anomalies in these Lindisfarne and Durrow Gospels could be something like signatures or a kind of personal touch, similar to some Roman mosaic floors, late Roman mosaic floors in England, where there are a few examples of small singular details that have been added to otherwise regular patterns. That has been interpreted as a kind of a signature, like this Roman mosaic floor in the Fishbourne Palace in England from the 3rd century of the Common Era, where a little bird appears, surprisingly, among the circular grapevines that decorate the border. So could the anomalies, the discrepancies in the Lindisfarne and Durrow Gospels be signatures or some kind of personal touches that are peculiar, idiosyncratic to these specific painters? That is possible, but Rosenblit does not think that this is the case. She argues that the discrepancies should instead be seen as deliberate aesthetic devices, as a play with symmetry and asymmetry that goes back to pre-Christian times, that is a native British aesthetics. And she looks to the Sutton Hoo treasure for parallels. There are 2 clasps that also feature anomalies and asymmetries of a similar kind. So this is the 2 clasps, and I have encircled here the eyes of the birds along the rims of the clasps or in the borders. On 3 sides, these eyes are just monochrome blue, but on the 4th side, the eyes have a kind of a pupil that is on iris perhaps is the right word, made with an extra, inlay of a gilded strip. So Rosenblit identifies this phenomenon or she argues that it is an expression of a native aesthetic, a preference for a very subtle play of symmetry and asymmetry that existed on the British Isles before the arrival of Christianity. It's a kind of a visual riddle that energizes the work, it teases and it stimulates the eye. Total symmetry would be dead. That would be like something created by a computer. So these anomalies or asymmetries, perhaps we don't even, or the beholder doesn't even consciously note it or see it, but it's registered by the eye and the brain. So it's a kind of a disturbance or a tension that animates the visual experience and keeps the attention focused. That at least is Alison Rosenblit's hypothesis, which I think is worth considering. Now, this was my last slide, so I will finish the recording now, and I look forward to meeting you Tuesday afternoon, this afternoon, same day that I'm making this recording. See you soon.